So we're back with episode 3 of the Nursery remodel, and this week's episode, you guessed it, we're making a dresser. Here's the idea that I have here. I'm not totally sold on all the measurements. I'm trying to find a way to maybe incorporate the green from the accent wall. This stripe is what I've got in mind now, but who knows, could change. In the meantime, we can go ahead and get our stuff and get to work. Alright, so to get started, we are picking up a 4x8 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood and a 4x8 sheet of poplar veneered 3/4 inch plywood. That's a little heavy. Let's get started later. Now, we're not using plywood for the entire thing. For the drawer faces and for the legs, we're going to use poplar hardwood because A, I don't want to cover up a bunch of plywood edges, and B, the drawer faces and the legs are going to take a lot of dings and hits over the year, and I don't want to have to worry about that veneer chipping through. So with hardwood comes milling, so let's skip plane these, square up these edges on the joiner, and we can get to work. Order of operations was crucial on this project because the cabinet carcass itself is going to be dependent on the interior dimensions of the leg assembly. So we need to get these hardwood boards ripped into strips and glued up so we can get our legs made, and then turn our focus over to the cabinet itself. Just a quick tip here, if you're gluing up blanks that are all the same dimensions and you don't have a lot of parallel clamps and give nice even pressure, then try to glue them up in one go. What I mean by that is gang gluing them up. Just make sure you pay attention to which boards you actually apply the glue to. That way you don't glue every single board together, just the ones you need to. And these can shift around a little bit on you when you're getting everything finalized. So have a pair of call boards, which are just extra boards that have flat surfaces with packing tape or painter's tape on them so the glue doesn't stick to them, and that'll keep everything nice and straight. Look at all the clamps it took to get all these blanks pulled together. Insane. But the next day, as I'm taking all these clamps off, you can see that I got all 7 of these blanks glued up at one time. Didn't have to do a bunch of different glue ups or wait for them. So once I got them out of clamps, I sent them through the planer just to get them to their final dimensions. Now, these are again arbitrary and totally personal preference, but I decided to square these up, making them 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. Getting these legs consistently cut to length is super important. So whether you're using a miter saw or a table saw with a sled like I am, make sure you have a stop block in place. That way you don't have any rocking or unevenness when you get to your leg assembly. Speaking of the leg assembly, I'm using dominoes to pull these together. I did 2 8mm dominoes in each joint, which was more than strong enough, but you could also use dowels, or you could just use pocket hole screws and just hide them on the bottom and up underneath. It's totally personal preference. You don't have to have a domino to make this work, but since I do and it's fast and reliable, that's what I chose to use. And then because we took our time making sure everything was nice and square when we were milling up, this leg assembly went together really easily. Just took a little bit of persuasion, knocking those dominoes in and then seating that top panel, and we could get those in clamps and move on to the next part of the project. Ooh, it is cold and wet. It's time to cut up some plywood. Not super fun to watch, so you know what that means. Let's montage. so it's got exposed plywood edges. I don't want exposed plywood edges. I also hate edge banding and iron on stuff. I'm just not very good at it. Mostly just operator air. So this is hardwood edge banding. I'm going to be putting a piece on the bottom and a piece on the top because the top and bottom of the cabinet are going to pocket hole screw into these. So you won't see the sides on the top and bottom. You'll just see the sides on the top, if that makes sense. If not, keep watching. And here's a perfect time. If you've picked up any tips or if you're enjoying the content so far, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and I would love to have you guys along for the ride. Now, even though we have a domino joiner, we have other methods of bringing things together, the carcass of the cabinet is made out of plywood. Plywood is exactly where pocket hole screws are meant to be used, so might as well use them because they're quick and easy. With the pocket hole screws drilled, we can go ahead and start working on the assembly. This was a nightmare because there's just one of me and this was a big cabinet. So I used every clamp that I had, trying to get different positions to get leverage and make sure I drove those screws in without the panel shifting on me. It took about an hour, but eventually I got it all put together and it looked pretty nice. Now, while the external walls of the carcass were a nightmare, the internal vertical partition was a lot easier because it just kind of friction fits into place. So I put a little bit of glue down and was going to drive some pocket holes. Now you'll notice that this vertical partition is actually made up of several different boards. You can see those pocket holes kind of going up the side there. That's because I did not want to buy more plywood, and this was going to be a center divider just there to attach drawer slides to, and it would never be seen. So it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Just goes to show that if you use what you got, you don't always have to spend extra money or compromise your project. Now, after calling it a night, I could get out the next morning and drill more pocket hole screws on the inside of the exterior walls of the carcass. Now, I know what you're wondering. Why didn't he just drill those before he put the carcass together? And that is an excellent question. It's because I forgot. But thankfully, I've got two different pocket hole jigs, and this one works great at odd angles because it's smaller. So we could get those pocket holes drilled, and then we could work on connecting our leg assemblies. Off camera, I cut and attached the face frame to the carcass, and then I could take some very detailed measurements from the carcass over to my table saw and figure out just how wide my drawer boxes needed to be. All kidding aside, we are going to rip this 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood to width and then cross cut it to length, put a 1/4 inch groove in the bottom for the bottom panel, and then we can start work on our drawer box assembly. Alright, and a little test fit here, a little loose, but once all four are attached should be fine, and looks like I'm laying out all the boards. Wow, this seems like a useless clip, but I spent time filming it, so you get to see it. We're going to move on to the drawer box construction. We're just using glue and brad nails here. This is how I always make my drawer boxes, and they've never given me any issues. Now, anytime that you're attaching drawer boxes to a carcass that has a face frame and your face frame is wider than the panel that makes up the wall behind it, you have to add filler strips. So that's what I did. I added my filler strips and I started attaching drawer slides. What I did not realize is that these drawer slides are a little bit cheaper, and because they're cheaper, the tolerance for them was very, very low. I ended up making the boxes dead on, but the filler strips were a little wide, and this caused a world of headache. I'll just walk you through it. Okay, so I didn't show all this on camera because I was troubleshooting and it was an absolute nightmare, but I don't like to hide my mistakes. I like to show them and like to help you guys avoid them. So what happened here was I measured back on the drawer slides. Let's see if I get the camera angle right here. I measured back from the face frame on this side and measured back from the front of the board on this side, which was a bonehead decision because this is thicker than that. This sits further, like it's recessed. If you look over here, like that's like a 2-inch difference. So I was trying to put in the drawer slide and it was racking so hard and it wouldn't really close. And I mean, these are supposed to be soft close and this one is now, but it was just going horribly. So I figured that out and I was still having issues And if you look on this side, you have to add filler strips because you have a face frame and because this kicks in a little bit more, it's recessed back. And this is totally flush, so I don't expect to have any issues with that one. This one, I didn't get it dead on, so I need to go back and trim this up. But that little 1/16 of an inch, I make my drawer boxes pretty close to dead on what they need to be, so that little bit extra will make that a really tight fit, and that'll start to compromise that soft close pull, which is gonna take your piece from feeling high end like it's really nice to feeling low end like a piece of junk. So do your due diligence, avoid my mistakes, make sure if you have to add filler strips that they are flush with the face frame on both sides, and that'll save you just a world of headache. So that was a rough lesson learned, but hopefully because I learned it on my end, you guys can avoid it on your end. Now we decided since I'm making this as a part of the nursery renovation, we might as well customize it to our needs. Our daughter is supposed to be here in January, and with a newborn baby comes bows and very small clothing, and these drawers are huge. So we added some dividers to help keep things organized and get the most bang for our buck. Okay, so we're at the point in the game where we need to figure out the drawer faces for the drawers. Now, apart from the legs, the main draw for this is the continuous grain across the front for all the drawer faces. So we've got our panel glued up, we've cut it down to size, it's rough cut into 2 individual squares in case the framing here on each side is not exactly square, which I'm not perfect, and unless you're Jesus, you're probably not perfect either, so these are probably not perfectly square. So we gave ourselves a little bit of allowance. We can custom cut those if we need to using the track saw. What I did on this one, because I tried a different technique on the bathroom vanity, I'll throw a little picture up here in the corner. If you haven't seen that video, definitely go check it out. Turned out great. But I had some issues getting the continuous grain. I had to go back and redo all of that. So instead what I'm going to do on this one is measure from the bottom face frame up to the middle of that first dark, or I guess the second dark gap. And 7 3/4 inches fits evenly on that gap all the way across. So I'm gonna rip both of the bottom panels 7 3/4 inches up. And I'm just gonna set the fence on the table saw and run those through. And that should give us perfectly level gaps across the bottom. And we'll just do that working our way up, and then we'll cut them to width to fit the openings on either side. Hopefully that all makes sense. If not, yeah, keep watching. Now, if you've been paying attention, you're probably wondering, when did he make that panel? We haven't seen anything about him making a panel. That's a fair question. You guys have seen me make a lot of panel gloves using the domino joiner and edge joining and all that stuff. This video was already getting really long. I didn't want to include unnecessary material, so I tried to streamline it and left that part out. If that's a part you guys really wanted to see and could gain some more insight from, throw a comment down below and let me know, and I'll be sure to include those in videos going forward. And now that we have the spacing figured out, we can get the drawer faces attached to the drawer boxes. The way that I like to do this is to make a template out of 1/2 inch MDF that matches the width of the handles that we're going to use. That way we can drill the holes through the drawer faces using that template and secure them to the drawer boxes using screws to those same holes. That way we don't mar up our drawer face. Once they're secure, we can push the drawer boxes out and then secure them all the way using screws from the backside and get the handles attached. And finally, with all of that out of the way, I'm happy to report that these drawer boxes were working beautifully. Now off camera, I did a little bit of final sanding and we're ready to apply finish. I'm using General Finishes Armor Seal here in a satin. I'm keeping it really simple, just using a foam brush to wipe on 2 coats. For each coat, I wiped a heavy coat on, let it sit for about 10 minutes to absorb, and then wiped off the excess before it had a chance to get tacky. Once the finish was all dried and cured up, I got it moved to the room and we can finally take a look at this sick B-roll. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this week's video. Thank you so much for following along. I know this was a long one. We ran into a lot of headaches both on camera and behind the scenes, but we persevered, we got it done. and I'm super thrilled with the results. As you can see, we've already got this thing loaded up with all the essentials. We're ready to go. Now, if you haven't been tracking along with the channel, this is the Nursery Remodel series. In episode 1, we did the closets. In episode 2, we tackled the accent wall. And in episode 3, we did the custom dresser. Now, next week in episode 4, we're going to be replacing this boring closet door with a nice, modern, sliding barn door. So if you don't want to miss that, be sure to ring the notification bell. That's going to do it for this episode. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll see you in the next one.